Welcome to episode 265 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we continue our special series celebrating the 50th anniversary of women FBI agents. This episode features a lively and honest conversation with previous guests of FBI Retired Case File Review. These retired agents talk about normally taboo women's issues, like biases and babies, but they also provide inspirational messages for future special agent candidates about what it was really like being a female agent in the FBI. I invited a diverse group of women to participate in this panel discussion: street agents, mid-management, and executive management types, single agents, agents with children, agents without children, white agents, agents of color, agents who retired within the past 5 years or less, and agents who, like me, joined the Bureau so very long ago. I wanted you to hear from many different voices. Everything that we talk about might not be pretty, but it's real talk. And the bottom line is, all of us loved our careers in the FBI. You can learn more about these amazing retired FBI agents in this episode's show notes at jerrywilliams.com. Before we get to the panel discussion, I forgot last week to remind you that my reader team email for July is out. It features a preview of my 4-part 50th anniversary of Women FBI Agents series and a review of the 1988 movie Feds. Remember that one? If you're a member of my reader team and you don't see my July email in your inbox, you know what to do. Check your spam filter and promotions tab. I want to welcome new listeners. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there are links to where you can join my reader team to keep up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies, buy me a coffee, and visit my website to learn more about me and my nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest today. We have returning a number of retired women agents who have been guests on this show. What I was hoping is that we would have an honest and open conversation about what it was like to be a woman in the FBI. Usually during my episodes, I just stick to the case reviews. I think it would be quite sexist to ask the women only about children and what they had to go through. But this one, we're going to talk about everything and anything that many people interested in joining the FBI, especially women, really want to know. The first person I'm going to ask a question to will be Lauren Anderson. Lauren is a retired agent who served in the FBI for nearly 29 years. During her career, she worked counterintelligence and counterterrorism cases and served as the FBI legal attaché, LEGAT, in the Paris office. She was assistant special agent in charge of the International Terrorism Branch of the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force and served as the interim special agent in charge of the New York Counterterrorism Division and the Intelligence Division. Welcome, Lauren.
Thanks, Jerry. It's great to be with you again and great to be with you, the other amazing women.
Lauren, you were on episode 156, where you talked about a bombing in Casablanca and also what it was like to be Paris Legat. Our first question that I'd like for you to answer would be, before joining the FBI, what were your expectations about working for the Bureau, and did they change over your career?
Thanks for letting me be the first out of the box today. My expectations were a few. One, that I would continue to learn, because continuous learning absolutely turned out to be true, and that's who I am. But I expected and hoped that I would have a positive impact on the lives of others, and I deeply wanted to serve my country and the people of our country. I knew there would be challenges. I accepted that I would have to work harder and longer to prove myself. And I believed the FBI would be an inherently fair and just organization, which it is to a great measure. But going to how those expectations might have changed, I have found that there were attitudes that still persisted despite the passage of time that were ignorant and I believe harmful to the culture of the FBI. One clear one is the old boy network, which remained alive and well. And unfortunately, it seemed to be worse towards the end of my career. But I don't want to focus on the negative. What I do want to say that is largely my expectations were met. I wanted to have a positive impact in the world. I believe deeply in justice and fairness and that positive impact. And there's no question that I was able to do that in the FBI. So for me, coming into the FBI with the expectations I have, they were overwhelmingly met. Were there moments that weren't met and disappointing? Of course, but overwhelmingly, my expectations were there and my career delivered on that. And I'm grateful for it.
All right. Thank you. Next up is Julia Cowley. Julia served in the FBI for nearly 22 years. She was a profiler in the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, and followed up with her selection to the FBI Laboratory Evidence Response Team. She later returned to the Boston Division as the supervisor of the Springfield RA, where she oversaw all federal criminal investigations in Western Massachusetts. She is the host of The Consult, a true crime podcast where she and former BAU colleagues examine behavior exhibited before, during, and after the criminal act. Hey, Julia.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. You have that question. Before you joined, what were your expectations about working for the FBI, and did they change over your career?
When I joined the FBI, I think I was a little naive. I believed if you just work hard, you can accomplish anything. I still believe that. I joined the FBI to become a profiler. And when I joined, I realized it's not that easy. You just don't walk in and become a profiler. So it was a lot of hard work, very exciting work. The biggest surprise to me is I thought when you join the FBI, you come in with this expectation that you have a solid background and a lot of work experience, and that's why you're chosen to be in the FBI. But when you walk in those doors, you kind of get stripped of all of that, and you get treated as if you know nothing at all. And so sometimes your backgrounds are not utilized and people don't recognize certain talents, and you get put places that maybe you would be better served in another squad. So I think that was kind of surprising. But I will say that when I walked in the door and I ended up on a white collar bank fraud squad and I had no background and no experience, I was really disappointed, thinking they're not utilizing my more violent crime background. However, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I learned how to be a really good case agent, pay attention to detail. I met my very best friend in the bureau on that squad. So I look back and I think everything happened for a reason. Were my expectations exactly what I thought they would be? No. But like Lauren, I had a very fulfilling career. I loved every minute of it. I don't regret any of the assignments. I don't regret any of the bumps in the road I might have hit. It was everything that I hoped and thought it would be. And when I retired, I looked back and I thought I was really glad that I did what I did and I wouldn't change a thing.
You were on episode 242, where you talked about the Golden State Killer and what it's like to be a BAU profiler. Next up is Gina Davis. Retired agent Gina Davis served 25 years with the FBI. She spent most of her bureau career working violent crimes and drug trafficking cases. She was in charge of the Tacoma Resident Agency out of the Seattle Division, where she initiated both a Safe Street Task Force and a Joint Terrorism Task Force during her 6 years in Tacoma. Her last bureau assignment was in the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division, CID, where she served as Chief of Staff for the Assistant Director. Jenna was on episode 69, Triple Murder Safe Street Task Force. Hey, Jenna.
Hey, Jerry.
Okay, so you're up. Before you joined, what were your expectations and did they change?
When I finally applied and came into your office to the FBI, I had very little expectations about what my life would be like in the FBI. I was actually in the frame of mind that I was going to use the FBI to make a point about how Black people could interact with law enforcement. As a child, I had seen how local police officers interacted with my father over ridiculous things like insignificant traffic stops, bugging us for money to get out of a ticket, that kind of stuff. And so my expectation was that I would be able to present a more fair, a more just appearance as a Black law enforcement officer. So that's what I did. That's what I tried to do while in the FBI. Did I meet some obstacles in that regard? Not really. Most of the people that I surrounded myself with were fair, they were objective, and they treated people with respect. I had some interactions with local law enforcement officers at times that were a little bit questionable, but overall, I think I accomplished what I wanted to do. And that was, again, to create a different face of Black law enforcement to the American public. And I also had as an auxiliary task to kind of educate a lot of people, because I found with my experience in the FBI that a lot of people had no real interaction outside of their normal communities, i.e. with the FBI being 90% white male when I joined. Most of these white males had never really interacted with a Black person, let alone a Black female. I tried to educate them and kind of provide a different perspective in that regards as well.
Very good. Thank you. Next up is Masayo Halpin. Retired agent Masayo Halpin served in the FBI for 20 years. During her career, she was assigned to the Portland Division, where for most of her career, she primarily worked human trafficking cases on a violent crime squad. She was also a member of the hostage negotiation team and evidence response team. She ended her career at the FBI as a recruiter and working in community outreach. Masayo was on episode 249, Human Trafficking and Commercial Sexual Exploitation. Masayo, what about you?
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me. When I entered into the FBI, coming from where I was coming from, so I'm from Tacoma. Shout out to Tacoma, Jenna. I expected the FBI to be this elite group, the smartest of the smart, the best of the best, just really sharp and on it. I was never really the smartest kid in the class, but I was a really hard worker. I never expected to get through that door. And then when I did, I was expecting to be embraced by all of these people who have the same work ethic and who just are there for justice and fighting crime, wanting to serve their country. I think I was really disappointed that when I arrived, it wasn't the case. Like any corporation, like any organization, you have people who cut corners. You have people who don't want to work as hard, may not go that extra yard. And I think that really disappointed me. Also, I expected to be treated equally, treated fairly. I have a law degree. I expected to be treated like everyone else. And that wasn't the case either. Being a female of color. For example, I had a supervisor who didn't really care for me much because I didn't sit, as I would say, I don't know if I can say this, blow sunshine up his ass. I wouldn't sit there and say, oh my God, you're great. Oh, I love you. Oh, you're this. I was there to work. And so I worked. I kept my head down and I worked. And another female agent came to me and said, you know, it wouldn't hurt you if you smiled to so-and-so a little bit more. I said, excuse me? She was like, why don't you smile? I said, because I'm not here to smile. I'm here to work. So I think my expectations were, I guess, a little unrealistic. And a senior agent took me aside and said, don't worry about what other people are doing. Worry about you. And once I got that mentality, I had to let it go.
I really appreciate your honesty. And I think that's really what we're looking for here. The FBI is not perfect, but I think at the end, we all still loved it and loved our career. We're giving an opportunity because it is the 50th anniversary of women FBI agents to talk real talk. So I appreciate that. Next up is Jane Mason. Retired agent Jane Mason served in the FBI for 28 years. Initially assigned to the Kansas City division, she spent most of her career in the New York office where she worked white-collar crime cases with a heavy focus on environmental crimes. As a collateral duty for 16 years, Jane Mason also served as the evidence response team leader, ERT leader, collecting forensic evidence at hundreds of local, national, and international crime scenes. Jane is the co-founder of Secure Investigation and the Secure FBI Directory, an investigative networking and referral tool. Hey, Jane.
Hey, Jerry. Thank you so much for having me. And it's wonderful to meet all these lovely women on this podcast.
What were your expectations about working for the FBI, and did they change over your career?
My answer will sound a little bit corny. My expectations for being in the FBI as a special agent, I believed it was going to be my dream job, and it turned out to be my dream job. Every day I looked forward to going to work at the FBI. I mean, there were challenges. It wasn't, completely 100% rosy every day. We'll probably get into some of those challenges at some point today. For the most part, I came into the FBI because I believe in justice, I believe in truth, and I believe in fairness, and I believe in the American people and supporting them. What I wanted to do was come into the FBI and solve cases and find evidence and learn the truth about the allegations that were being put forth. It was my passion coming into the FBI. It remained my passion. That's why I stayed as a street agent, as they say, for 28 years, because that was just my passion the entire time.
Jane was on episode 174, Environmental Crime and Evidence Collection. All right, next up is Katherine Schweit. Retired agent Katherine Schweit served in the FBI for 20 years. Her first assignment was to the Milwaukee Division, where she worked national security matters. She was promoted to FBI headquarters and assigned to the Counterintelligence Division's training center at Quantico, and then joined the National Security Branch executive staff. Her last bureau assignment was as a senior executive, guiding the formation of the FBI's Active Shooter Initiative. She is the author of Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis, and the host of the Stop the Killing podcast. Hey, Katherine.
Hi, thanks. I'm with everybody else. I'm so thrilled to be here. There are so many, in some cases, names that I've heard for years, and I've never actually seen your face because we worked on different parts of the country. So it's wonderful to see you. I know many of you by reputation. I came into the Bureau, I guess everybody has their own story about how you come in. I came in with an expectation that was pretty limited. I have a cousin who was an agent. I was a prosecutor in Chicago. I wasn't interested in joining the FBI, which is something that I could never say at the academy because so many people work so hard to get there. And then I felt really terrible that I was saying, I don't know, I kind of fell into this job. But that's kind of the truth in that one of the reasons why I joined the FBI and my expectation was I was a single mom. I had 2 kids and I just needed some stability. That was part of it. And as a prosecutor in Chicago at the time, and probably still is the largest court system in the country. And if you got transferred from the Rolling Meadows office to 26th and Cal to do night court, suddenly you're a single mom trying to figure out how to physically move. It's so far away, you have to move, or to Markham, you have to move your house to another place. And I couldn't deal with that instability. The other thing is I spoke to my cousin about coming in. He was hounding me about, you should join. They need women, they need lawyers. He said to me, the difference between the state and the federal work that you're doing is you're still working for the good guys, but when it hits the fan, the federal government doesn't tell you they don't have budget money for it. And I found that to be true. And the other thing is I said to him, I am maybe in the way that you were talking about, Masayo, I was not interested in hazing. I wasn't interested in coming into the academy and having to prove myself so much all over again, especially because when I was a couple weeks at the academy, I turned 37. So I was the oldest person in our class. I wasn't really interested in completely going back to the bottom. I did find that the people at the academy, even though they're guys and some of them are just total asses, they were perfectly fine because you find that every place. And I saw the same thing when I was a prosecutor, the same thing as I worked as a journalist. So I think that didn't surprise me. The fact that being a female sometimes is an uphill battle. I came from Chicago and I wanted to go someplace where the politics just didn't count. I found the Bureau's politics with the capital P, Democrat, Republican, Independent. I found great pleasure in working in an environment where I was working for the good guys and I didn't have to worry about the political climate. Coming from Chicago, that was really important to me to not have to worry about whether or not I was going to bring a case or work a case because somebody wanted it or didn't want it. So I was really pleased about that. I will say that I did deal with a lot of baptism by fire. 4 years into the Bureau, my time in the Bureau, 9/11 happened, and I happened to be the acting terrorism supervisor for the Milwaukee office at the time. So that kind of plummeted me. I'd like to say vaulted, but it didn't. It plummeted me down into the depth of people who didn't think that I should be doing that job, primarily men, worked actively to sabotage me. And that was nothing that I needed when I was working 60 and 70, 80 hours a week like the rest of us. So that was very frustrating. But I think to the credit, there were other supervisors who stood up for me and slapped down, so to speak, in words, the agents who were literally questioning whether they were going to follow the directions that I was giving them at a very stressful time. So I found as many times when, as a female, you deal with challenges, I also found a lot of times where I found the men had my back, and I appreciated that.
Thank you. Katherine was on episode 255, School Shootings, Active Shooter Program. Next up is Kathy Stearman. Retired Agent Kathy Stearman served in the FBI for more than 26 years. She served as the FBI Legal Attaché, LEGAT, in India, based out of New Delhi, and LEGAT in Beijing, China. Her last bureau assignment prior to retirement was as supervisory special agent of a national security squad in the FBI's San Francisco division. Kathy is an author. Her expectation-shattering memoir is titled, It's Not About the Gun: Lessons from My Global Career as a Female FBI Agent. Kathy?
Jerry, thanks so much. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this group. I really, really do appreciate it. As far as my expectations, when I joined the Bureau, I was young and naive. I was only 25. So the only expectation that I had was that it was going to be this amazingly rigorous, responsible, adventurous job where I could serve my country. And it was that. As far as exceeding expectations, or how did those expectations change? It actually did. My expectations did change because the job exceeded those expectations. I got to do things, work cases that I never would have dreamed ever. And I made friends that I will have for life. At the same time, honestly, again, this is where I was extremely naive. I wasn't prepared for the old boys network, and I met that head on right at Quantico as I was going through training. It wasn't so bad as I went through my earlier years of the Bureau, but what I found as a female agent, that if you wanted to climb the ladder, that's when there were men who really didn't want to see you do that. That was something that I didn't expect. One of the things that all the young women ask me who email me after they read my book, they ask me this question: knowing what you know now, would you do it again? And my answer is always, absolutely, and a heartbeat. Looking back over everything, I would do it again in a second.
Thanks, Kathy. Kathy was on episode 233, FBI in India and China, Women in the FBI, It's Not About the Gun. Next up is Judy Tyler. Judy, I don't feel bad making you be the last person to answer this question because this is your fifth time being on the podcast. Retired agent Judy Tyler served in the FBI for 31 years. She spent most of her career in the Philadelphia division, working investigations targeting violent drug trafficking. During her bureau career, she specialized in the recruitment, development, and operation of human intelligence, also known as informants, sources, and cooperating witnesses. Post-retirement as a contract instructor, Judy continues to share her expertise in training current FBI agents as part of a specialized in-service program. Hey, Judy.
Hey, Jerry.
What were your expectations and did they change?
I came into the Bureau from having been a police officer, and I know that I really enjoyed detective work, taking a case from the very beginning all the way through the prosecution. And that's what I was looking forward to. I started in the Norfolk division. I got assigned to casework and it met my expectations. And what I really enjoyed was bringing the federal resources to a case that, coming from a small police department, we didn't have the same type of resources available that the FBI does, especially later in Philadelphia where you have wiretap type cases and things like that, drug buy money. I certainly appreciated all the support that the Bureau cases provided.
Judy was on, as I said, several episodes, but her last one was episode 238, Drug Kingpin Maurice Phillips, Death Penalty Case. For those of you who have never listened to an FBI retired case file review episode before, I'm retired agent Jerry Williams. I served in the FBI for 26 years. I spent most of my bureau career working major economic fraud investigations targeting financial crimes and corruption, such as advance fee scams, Ponzi schemes, business-to-business telemarketing fraud, and embezzlement. Towards the last 5 years of my FBI career, I was appointed as the spokesperson for the Philadelphia division, taking on the responsibility of educating and informing the media and public about the Bureau, which I'm still doing today. When it comes to the question of what were your expectations, I joined the FBI when I was 25. I didn't have a lot of expectations. I applied, and 6 months later, I was walking to the FBI Academy. I will say, and again, I'm going to be honest, the first 4 years of my Bureau career were problematic. I didn't just feel it. I knew that there were agents, many of them who had joined the FBI from the program where you came into the FBI and were a clerk for a number of years and then you became an agent. But a number of those older guys thought that the Bureau was lowering their standards because of the ranking system the FBI was employing at the time. I was told in my face that I didn't need to worry because I was not one of the unqualified ones that they were talking about. And I really felt that for the first 4 years, at which point things got better, much, much better. At the end, I loved my career and had a fabulous career, but there were times that I did feel sexism and racism, but I would never change anything about the casework that I did and the many wonderful people that I did meet. All right, so we've all gone through the initial question. I'm just going to throw the next question out and we'll see who wants to answer. If we all want to answer, then we'll do that too. And some of you have already touched on this. The question is, did you ever question if you belonged? And if you did, what did you do to push through those negative thoughts? Masayo?
I always had this feeling that I was going to get tapped on the shoulder by a supervisor or management saying, okay, we made a mistake. You don't belong here. It's time to go. I had that feeling through Quantico. I had that feeling through my entire career because, again, I had this belief that the FBI was this, and even people today who don't know a lot about the FBI think it's this mysterious thing. I remember someone asked me if I flew in from Washington, D.C. They didn't even know the FBI was in the community. And I believed that the FBI was this great thing. And so I didn't feel like someone like myself belonged in the FBI. I wasn't the smartest kid in the class. I was a real hard worker, and I just always felt a little inadequate. I was surrounded by white men wearing suits, went to Ivy League schools, had trust funds, and had great families, coming from a dysfunctional family. And I had a multitude of issues in my family and how I was raised. I just didn't feel like I belonged there. So I was always expecting that tap on the shoulder, and it actually kind of became a joke because even as a senior agent, I started my own task force. I was doing great things. I still expected that tap on the shoulder. And then when you're working with the guys, it's like a fraternity. They're just dudes. Several times as the recruiter, I would speak to an agent and I would say to my administrative assistant, I would say, that person would not have made it in the Bureau if I was the recruiter at the time. Even though I thought that about several agents that I worked with, I still did not feel like I belonged. And I don't want this to sound negative. I loved the FBI. I joined the FBI to change the system and to fight the man, but it changed me and I loved the Bureau, but it wasn't an easy journey. That doubt stayed with me all the way through the end. We had a great task force. We were doing great things, but then all of a sudden the new ASAC comes in and basically fires me. It was just a doubt that always stayed with me that I don't think I ever got rid of it.
I think I felt that way the first 4 years. And I think what I was reflecting was that attitude that I didn't belong. And I kind of accepted it in a way. It was almost like I felt imposter syndrome. But after that first 4 years, I kind of felt like, wait a minute, I know who I am. I know what I bring. I know I have value. And I pushed past that. At some point, I thought to myself, I belong here as much as anybody else does. And those thoughts just went away. I really kind of feel sad that there wasn't somebody, because there was somebody, definitely, the SAC at the time, Wayne Davis, who really mentored me and really made me know that I belonged there and the feelings that I had that I needed to get past him. And I'm sorry, Masayo, that you weren't able to find somebody that could do that for you. And I think that happens when there are so few women of color in the Bureau, because each and every one that comes in is almost out there by yourself, starting all over again. And there are not others who kind of see what you're going through and can mentor you.
One thing also, just to finish, I never shared that with anyone. So that doubt was inside, never let them see you cry, never let them see you have doubt. I was very confident and almost probably too confident, but I never shared that with anyone. I hope you don't feel bad because I had a great career.
I certainly know a little bit about your story and know that you had a fabulous time, but I also know you've shared your background. You came from a background that is not like anybody else's. A little plug for your memoir. I hope it gets done because there are very few people who came into the FBI with a parent that had been incarcerated. And so I can understand your story. And I'm so glad that you still enjoyed your career. Anyone else who had self-doubts? Lauren?
First of all, Masayo, thank you. Thank you for being so honest and so open about what your experience was, because that's not always easy. I'm grateful for your willingness to share that. And thank you. And Jerry, thank you. You and I have talked about your first 4 years, and that's also important. And like you, Masayo, I was somebody who was never the smartest kid in class, but I worked my ass off. Whatever it was, no one was going to defeat me. No one was going to define whether I failed or not. That was up to me. And I might not be the highest IQ, but no one's going to beat me when it comes to working hard and learning and trying to understand what the job entails to get there. Having said that, though, one thing I'm very grateful for is that I was raised by a mom and dad who told me I had no boundaries. And for not your age, Masayo, I think, but certainly for Jerry and I, to have a father at that point who said to you, you can be anything, you can do anything, you should always be the boss. That was incredibly empowering, and to have two brothers. So I would say that when I came in, I didn't have those doubts. I certainly met people who tried to undermine me and chip away. And one thing I'd like to share, and I won't take a lot of time, I'll be quick. During new agents training, one of my classmates, and I was also young, I had just turned 26, was a Vietnam veteran, Air Force pilot. And today he would have been fired for what he said to me, but we were sitting around at the boardroom in the academy, and he started getting up in my face like this. And you took the space of a white guy, and it's not fair. They have these ranges now, and women and minorities can get in just because they're women and minorities, and it doesn't matter who they are. And I'm like, whoa. And thanks to my dad and my brothers, I just went, whoa, wait a minute. I said, let me just stop you right there. The way I got in here was the way everybody got in here. And let me tell you something. I said, my scores in the written test and in the interview were as high as any white guy. So I didn't take any white guy's space to get into this class. And I think you should just zip it up at this point. The other.
Gotta go.
I'm like, you assholes, 1984. Who said that to people in 1984? I'm like, dude, by the way, Katherine, my first office was Milwaukee. I had black guys in my class too, and they're all sitting around because they're wondering how the baby 26-year-old white chick's going to answer that question. And I was just like, are you kidding me? And a final quick turnaround about how the world spins and justice happens and karma arrives. In about 2005, so 21 years afterward, and I was back at the academy for something from Paris, and I ran into this classmate, and he was full-time instructor at the academy at that point. His kids were little, and I knew he had a daughter when we went through the academy. I'm like, hey, how's it going? How's the kids? How's your daughter? And he looked at me without saying a word. There was this passage of a knowing moment, and he said, she's great. I said, what's she's doing? He said, she went to the Air Force Academy, and she's a fighter pilot. And I'm like, yes, the world has come full circle, and now you get it. That's all I wanted to share, but it's just one of those moments, and we do have our ups and downs, but sometimes you get your moment to say it and karma comes back around and kicks that person in the ass where they deserve it.
Exactly. Anybody else? Yeah, Jane.
Mine is really a finite event that happened to me. So in 1994, I was pregnant with my daughter, and I had been an agent by then for, I came in 86, so 8 years. And I was working for a white male. I really liked him, though. He was a nice, fair guy. I was on the white collar crime squad, and he came from an administrative squad to our squad. So we didn't know a lot about our violation, but we were all trying to educate him, and everybody got along really, really well. I worked my whole pregnancy. I made arrests during my pregnancy. I'll never forget, I made an arrest when I was 7 months pregnant. I was so mad. It was one of my own subjects, and I had already arrested him once, and he committed the same exact violation. And I went and rearrested him, and I was just so mad at him. You're under arrest again. So at 9 months, I'm wearing muumuus every day at work by now. My daughter was late, of course. I finally went out on maternity leave, and I said to my supervisor, okay, this is my last day. And he said, well, okay, give me your badge and your gun. And I said, what? And he said, I'll take your badge and your gun now. And I said, does that mean because I'm going on maternity leave, I'm no longer an FBI agent? And he said, that's right. It took me like the rest of a couple of days that I delayed my maternity leave so I could work that out. I had to go all the way to the ombudsman, who at the time was a female, thank goodness, because she said, no, that's not right. And between the time he told me that and the time the ombudsman said that to me, there were many people that said, yes, as a pregnant female FBI agent, you have to turn in your badge and your gun. And I was floored. So finally it worked its way out, but that has stuck with me for years. And I got no karma out of it. The best karma I got out of it was once that supervisor retired, he wanted to go out to lunch with me, and I didn't have time to go to lunch with him. That was the best karma I got.
Wow, that is unbelievable. Is there anybody else who wants to answer that question?
Judy raised her hand.
I had the same experience as Jane. In 1987, they tried to take my badge and gun away when I went out on maternity leave. And I told them, no, they couldn't have it. I was still an agent and I refused to give it to them. And they stopped asking. And they said, well, we have trouble getting it back from the support when they go out because most of them don't come back. I said, well, I'm coming back and I'm not giving it up. And that was the end of it.
Absolutely amazing. I had never heard about that before.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go to, because I know some of you might have to leave early, and I think this is an important one for everyone to answer. What advice would you give to women who are considering a career as a special agent in the FBI? Katherine, why don't you go first?
Definitely. I think that what we were raised with, and I'm in my 60s, right? So what we were raised with versus what kids are raised with now, they're much more, we can do anything. And I hear from, as I'm sure all of you do, a lot of young ladies who are interested in being in the FBI. And I also hear from young men sometimes who are wanting to know. I tell them, don't compromise at all. And one of the things that I say to every one of them, because when I get them on the phone, they say, sorry, sorry, sorry. And I always say to them, when I have interns in my office, I would tell the interns that this is the sorry jar. And you have to put $1 in it every time you say sorry, because only women in this job say sorry. If you bump into somebody, you can say, excuse me, but don't say sorry for doing your job. When women go into the job, into any of their jobs, they always seem to feel like it's a privilege that they got the job. Men apply for a job because they have 4 of the 10 qualifications listed. Women apply for the job if they have 9 of 10 qualifications listed. I tell the women, you can do whatever you want, but the first thing is you have to overcome your own limitations that you set with yourself from expectations from hearing other people kick you in the teeth and not believe that you can do it. So you have to believe that you can do it because, look, I'm no wizard. I'm in the FBI. I managed a whole career in it. I'm a lawyer. I went through law school. You can do it too if you want, but you have to believe that and you have to push through it when people give you grief, because in every job, people have given me grief about it. So that's kind of what I tell them every time.
I'm going to ask you, because I know you have to leave. I know one of the most important things for women who are considering the FBI, because most people who join are 31 years old. That's the average age. And so many of those women have kids. And I know you had a kind of a unique situation. So my question is, did having children affect your career, and in which way?
Well, I mean, certainly having children affects everything, heaven knows. But when I decided to go into the FBI, it was my mother who said, you can't do that to your kids. My kids were 2 and 7 at the time. And she said, and my mom raised 10 kids and she supported me in almost every single thing. But she said, you're talking about going and leaving your kids for 20 weeks with 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there and a few weeks with your ex-husband. And you can't do that. And I said, I'm going to give my kids a better life. I have 2 tough, smart girls who I love to death, and they challenge me on everything. They're successful. They both finished college as they chose to, and they have careers. I think I became a great role model for my kids because we did work through 9/11, which was really tough. They came to the office with me on the weekends on 9/11 and sat and watched a 10-inch television screen in black and white that was on the top of a cabinet while I cleared the mail from my desk and things like that. And my kids learned a lot from having a mom who was in the FBI. And I think I learned too that kids are tough and they can deal with a lot of things. So it was tough to have kids. I mean, I think what I gave up was going out after work. I didn't develop a lot of friends at the office that I went out with afterwards, but I think anybody who's a mom has experienced that.
Can you talk about the unique strengths that women agents bring to the FBI?
Yeah, I think I'll give you a great example. In my mind, a great example. I worked a case in an RA in Milwaukee with a Mann Act case, right, which is a sexual assault over state lines. The agent who was assigned the case was just as oafy and as stupid as you would have expected he would have been when he went to talk to a 14-year-old, but he needed to do a prove-up with a bunch of pictures, and he asked me to go with him because there were just two of us in the RA at the time. He pulls this picture file out in front of this 14-year-old girl's 10-year-old brother and mother and expects her to say, "Oh yeah, that's the guy who I had sex with." It was just the dumbest thing on his part. So she was like, I don't know. And I said, Gina, I need to take a walk with her because you need to talk to the 10-year-old. And I walked with that girl and I just talked to her about being a woman and being a young lady and the pressures that happened that I remembered as being a girl and a teenager, and how sometimes you think you know and you're protecting somebody, but that you have to protect yourself first. It's okay to set a good example for your brother and things like that. When we went to leave, we were in different cars parked next to each other. And when we walked back to the house, and it was in this town of like 400 people, when we walked back to the house, the other agent came out of the house and he and I went to leave, and she turned to him and she said, "I want to see the pictures again." She said, "That's the guy." But I think a female brings to the table creativity that just different. And you have somebody who was a whiz at math or science or cyber stuff. Women bring something unique to the table, and we don't have enough women in this business, and we need more.
Thank you, Katherine. We'll throw those questions out again. What advice would you give to women who are considering a career as a special agent in the FBI? Julia?
Well, I'm just going to piggyback on what Katherine said about not compromising and persevering. And this is going to sound very corny, but when I was in graduate school, we had an FBI agent come talk to our class, and I had majored in chemistry, getting a graduate degree in forensic science. I wanted to go into law enforcement. I knew at some point I wanted to be an FBI profiler as well. And one of the students in my class had asked, "What are the chances if we join the FBI, we could become a profiler?" And the agent said 0. And I thought, well, that's impossible. Somebody's a profiler in there. I said it earlier when on the first question that I did join the FBI to be a profiler, and I knew it was going to be very difficult, but I just never gave up. I did everything that I could to become a good case agent, to become qualified, to check all the boxes that needed to be checked so that I would be competitive for one of those positions. And I just never gave up. And I think that's probably, like the other panelists have talked about, I wasn't the smartest. I wasn't the best athlete, didn't have a law enforcement background in my family or anything like that. But the one thing I can say, I never give up. I never give up on anything. And you've got some later questions, and I'll give you some examples. Just don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Don't give up. Do whatever you need to accomplish the goals. And I do believe it can happen. Sometimes it's your mindset. You think, okay, that didn't work out, and that's not working out because it's giving me another opportunity. And I have been analyzed by the FBI psychiatrist, and they did tell me I had a very Pollyanna-ish view of the world. So I know I do. He said, for someone in law enforcement, you're very Pollyanna-ish. I'm also very cynical. I think that's the thing I would say, just never give up. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. And a lot of people are going to tell you that.
Anyone else with advice? Yes, Kathy.
One of the things that I tell young women is go into the bureau and change it. Don't let it change you. I tell them that because I fully admit, the FBI changed me and it made me a harder person. And like Julia was saying, she's cynical. I wasn't cynical. I was this very naive young girl, but I became cynical. And I became harder, and I became more of a fighter. And I'm really, really glad I became more of a fighter. But I also feel like that along the way, I started to lose the feminine side of myself. So I tell young women, go into the Bureau and be a woman. It's okay. It's okay to be yourself. And if you make it into the FBI, don't let anyone ever, ever, ever make you feel like that you don't belong there. Because if you make it into the FBI, you have a skill set that the FBI needs, but don't ever change who you are. A lot of them have read my book and now they say to me this like, oh my gosh, now I know exactly what you're saying. I want to change the FBI. I want to go in as a woman and bring the special skill sets that a woman has to offer. I think that a lot of young women are looking for that type of statement for other women to say to them, it's okay to be you. It's okay to be a woman. It's okay to be feminine. But at the same time, you might have to become a little tougher, but it doesn't mean that you have to completely change yourself. And I feel that in some ways I did change myself.
Anyone else?
Hi, Jerry. I've been sitting here thinking about the conversations we're having regarding this issue. And I think from a very basic point, I'd like to state that I tell women who talk to me about the FBI that they should only step forth if they're ready for the challenge, because it is challenging. Any job in which you're representing the public, defending the Constitution, requires a lot of internal strength and fortitude. Don't go into this job half-ass thinking that it's going to be easy or that you'll work your way through the system and get what you want. You're going to have to work for every damn thing you get. And you're going to have to work very hard in order to be taken seriously. When I started the training program for agents who had been in the field after a couple of years, I always stressed to them that they needed to be the best case agent. They needed to be, as the SACs used to refer to their good agents in the field, as the stallions. They wanted stallions. You had to be a stallion because as a stallion, you got to do anything else you wanted to do. If you were just a little show pony, you weren't going to get any of the perks that you might want to do in this job. And so I tell them to be prepared to fight, be prepared to work hard. Don't give up getting after what you want from the FBI. When I joined, I had no preconceived notions about what I couldn't do. I was raised in a military household. My father was always the first in some position or another. We were always one of the few Black families, or if only the Black family in every community that we lived in. And so I was accustomed to being the pioneer, being the one and only. I think that served me well when I joined the FBI because I went there with no preconceived notions about what I couldn't do. I just assumed I could do everything. And I pursued my career in that particular way. So I always tell women, go after it and be prepared to work hard.
Thanks, Jenna. Jane, what about you?
One thing that I'm hearing from everyone, which I love, is just never give up. And the tenacity is just so important. If this is your dream job, your goal job, and never give up, and then you'll achieve it. One of the more practical things that I would give advice to a younger person coming into the Bureau is to learn some time management skills. I felt like I really could have used a little bit more time management for myself between, having a family and then a full caseload evidence response team and all the other challenges that come with maintaining physical fitness and firearms and all the other things that we had to do. And then I had 7 surgeries with a 9/11 related cancer that I got while I was still at the Bureau, and just so many things that life throws at you. But you still have to make your cases. As an agent, you still have to make your cases. If you're in management, you still have to perform within your own silo. That's just one of the things that I've always thought about that I would really have liked a little bit more of time management skills.
And Lauren.
Thank you. Everybody said such great things. And I would like to say something a little lighthearted too, and that is have a sense of humor. So often we take ourselves so seriously because we have to. We have to be serious. We have to know everything. It's a serious job. But sometimes humor in the right place in the right time can make such a difference, and being willing to laugh at yourself, not make yourself a laughing stock, but laugh at yourself, laugh at situations can really make a big difference. 2 other things I would say is if you come into the FBI for a career, which could be awesome, you're going to face the challenges that a lot of these other amazing women have said, but look at it as a never-ending graduate program. You have the opportunity to continue to learn in grad school like nobody else is seeing. And then my final thought is this, and I would bet that every one of these women who I'm happy to be a part of today would agree with this. And that is, we allowed the job to define who we are. It's who I am, not what I do. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned very late in my career is that, yes, it's a career. It's not who I am. It's what I do. Because if you allow it to be who I am, which I think most of us have done, when you hit bumps in the road and you get towards the end of that career, it's going to be really tough. What I will say is the women who have managed families and careers and all this are probably doing a much better job at it's not who I am, it's what I do. But that would be my final piece of advice.
Thank you. Masayo, I was wondering what advice you would give to women who are considering a career as a special agent.
Most of the advice I would give has been said. Stay true to yourself. I came in to change the system and to change the Bureau and how the Bureau saw people of color and how they treated people of color. And what ultimately happened was the Bureau changed me. I think because of my background and other things, I could have gone either way. I didn't mean to become an FBI agent. It wasn't something I had planned, but my values and morals are a little questionable at times, but the FBI straightened that out with the core values. One thing Lauren just said was, I used to say that all the time. The FBI, I used to say that to my friends. It's not who I am, it's what I do. And then when I retired, at my retirement, I realized it really was who I was. And I'm kind of glad because I still live by those core values, integrity. And I mean, I have a 6-year-old daughter now, and I tell her things like, never be late. It's always better to be 15 minutes early than 5 minutes late. Your word is everything, integrity, responsibility, everything that I learned from the FBI that I may not have learned growing up. So I would tell women, like I teach at our local community college, and I've had females come up to me and say, hey, I want to be an FBI agent. One thing I say is also live your life now as if you were an FBI agent. Because as a recruiter, when I was looking at your application, I could tell because I would ask questions and I can tell if you're serious or if this was something that you just started like thinking about it. So start living your life now as if you were an FBI agent and follow the core values and the integrity because you will be watched. And that's one thing I think also I learned was as an FBI agent, you are always being watched. Even now, looking at everyone here, people, when they find out what you did, they're going to watch how you react. They're going to watch how you handle the situation. They're going to watch what you say. That was hard for me as an FBI agent because I realized, whoa, I'm speaking for the FBI here. I can't say things anymore that I just want to say. Going into like a multi-agency task force meeting, when you didn't know what was going on, but you're there as the FBI, they would be talking about it and then they would all turn to you. What does the FBI think? You're always being watched. I think as women agents, we have to keep that in mind because people judge you and they judge you quickly based on how you respond or how you carry yourself. Even today, they still judge you. So just kind of be conscious of that you will always be watched.
I don't normally ask questions about whether you have children and how were you able to handle your career. If you did have them, I thought I'd give everyone a chance to answer the question about whether or not having children or not having children affected your career. Who would like to answer that? Judy?
Yes, I had 2 children. And I decided very early on not to put in for the supervisor position and stay a case agent throughout my career, primarily because I didn't want to move my family time and time again. I'm a child of a military family where we had to move every 2 years. And I didn't want to do that to my own family, but I did want to have children. So I stayed in one office pretty much for most of my career. After the initial move where my husband had to quit and get another job, I didn't want to ask him to keep sacrificing either because it is very disruptive when you move. The other big issue is you need to have roots in an area to provide for your children, for childcare and all of that, because the FBI frequently takes you away from your family when you get transferred. If you don't have family nearby to help out, you've got to do that on your own.
Anyone else? Kathy?
I don't have children, so I can't speak for how difficult the job is if you do have children. But what I can say is, especially being a LEAT overseas in India and China, if I had had children, I would never have gotten to see those children. I just wouldn't have. And I'm being very honest about this. I would not have gotten to see them because I have a very supportive husband and he has followed me from field office to field office and around the world. I didn't get to see him. So I can't imagine what my life would have been like if I had had children along with me. But having said that, I'm sure that there are women who have done it and are doing it, and they're doing a fantastic job. I think that they would definitely have to have a very supportive partner or spouse. But for me, I spent so much time on the job, I would have been neglectful of them. I know it.
Even for me, I have 3 kids, which were adopted. We adopted my 3 kids as infants. And my husband, I couldn't have done it without my husband, even though I stayed primarily 24 of the 26 years in the FBI in Philadelphia. I still was able to do what I did, which was to dedicate my life to the FBI because my husband was there. He was a school teacher, so he was there after school. He was there all summer to help with the kids. Even now, as I'm involved in all these crazy things with podcasting and writing books, he's the one who's cooking dinner every night. As women doing this job as a special agent, whether or not you go up in management and travel or you stay in the field, you will definitely need to have that support that Judy talked about, whether it is family or friends and neighbors that become like family. Anyone else want to talk about that? Masayo?
I was the agent that did not have children and that was single most of my career. I feel like that I was tasked with a lot of late night shifts, weekend shifts. It may have just been my office, but they were hesitant to ask the other female agents who did have kids. So I ended up filling in a lot. And I didn't have a problem with that because I didn't have kids. I felt it important that parents, if they need to be with their children, like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I would always volunteer for those holidays so people can spend time with their families. My mom was up in Tacoma, and so it was only a 3-hour drive. I could go and come back. But I always volunteer for those so people can be with their kids. We used to have this saying in our office, which is awful, and I'm embarrassed now that seeing all of you, you're either a great mother or a great agent, but you can't be both. And I think that's unfair. From being a single agent and seeing what I saw, I think it could be a little accurate. They weren't asked to work late. They were great agents, but they weren't tasked. Like if a kid went missing, I would be there, all night, whereas they could leave and be home with their kids. And I mean, is it a fairness thing? Yes and no, because I think it's fair that children need their parents. I was very supportive of that. But as a single agent who did not have children at the time, I got tasked with a lot of stuff. But now that I am a parent, and again, my daughter is 6 and we adopted her as well. So I didn't have to take maternity leave and stuff like that.
Anyone else? All right, we'll go with Jane first and then Julia.
A couple of things very briefly. You're absolutely right. I was going to say, before you said your great expression, I always felt, especially when my kids were younger, that I wasn't a great agent and I wasn't a great mom because I didn't have time to be great at anything. That weighed on me because I was really used to being more than a full-time FBI agent. When I was single at the FBI, I too volunteered for all the holiday shifts. I volunteered for everything because I knew so many family people wanted to be home for those important days. So when I finally did have children, I appreciated having those days with my family so much. The other thing I wanted to just mention quickly, back to 9/11, I was in the New York office and on the evidence response team. And my daughter's father, we were divorced by then. He was in charge of the CART team for the New York office. So he and I were both gone full-time 9 months, and we barely saw our children for that time. My daughter was in the 3rd grade then, and she told everybody she could see it's as though she lost both her parents at 9/11 because it's like she lost us. She never, ever saw us. And that was challenging too. When I heard that, it was very challenging.
Wow. Julia?
So I just want to say I had a very supportive husband. I was married before I joined the Bureau, and I'm still married to the same person. And he's my biggest fan, my biggest supporter. And we decided to have children. I'd been an agent for 5 years. I did not have children during the events of 9/11. He would have been a single dad for a very long time. Once I had children, there's times, especially as you're working cases, sometimes it's kind of a 9-to-5 job. You're building a case, but then it can get really busy. And I was just met with one of my former partners. She and I worked a very big public corruption case against a state senator. And at the time, we both had 2 toddlers. We each had 2 toddlers. We just talked about it just recently. Like that time was an absolute blur for both of us. Running around, phone calls at night, writing things in the middle, bringing the kids into the squad area, calling our husbands, can you pick them up, switching cars. It was just an absolute blur. But what I will say, we ended up, both of us together, it was a very successful public corruption case. I don't remember any of it, really. I had to go back and refresh my memory. But did it change my life? Absolutely changed my life in the Bureau. And parts of my career, just a blur. And other parts, I have great things I can remember. That's how it impacted my career.
Well, definitely, I agree with all of you, especially during trial prep. That mother's guilt was very, very strong. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but that's what I was going to do. I was going to ask Lauren and Jenna and Kathy, who don't have kids, but who moved up in management at pretty high levels. Do you think you would have achieved the same thing you achieved if you had children? I mean, I don't know if you can answer that, but I'd love to hear your response. Lauren?
I'll jump in because I also wanted to share an historical note that maybe some of you know and some of you don't. We all know not many women have risen to the highest ranks in the FBI, but the first woman executive to rise high that had children, and she adopted a child with her agent husband, was only 22 years ago. There's been women agents for 50 years, and all those years and those handful of women that rose up, none of them ahead of me that rose up in the ranks had children. Many of them weren't married. So when Ellen Knowlton, who was the special agent in charge of the criminal division, first woman in that job at WFO, in the late 90s, she and her husband, Dave Knowlton, who was the head of the inspection division, among other jobs, both of them awesome, and they chose to adopt a child. It was like a big deal because it's like, whoa, the first woman executive who has a child. And it was at the turn of this millennium. That's just amazing to me. But to go to your question, Jerry, yeah, I wanted children. I was married for 15 years. It didn't happen for us. But in my view, and kind of going to what Kathy just said, I think it would have been extremely difficult to have the career that I had, to be overseas for 5.5 years, to have the job they had at WFO in New York with a kid without a supportive partner would have been impossible. I mean, truly impossible. You would have had to have a great partner alongside to manage it, because there's no way as you go up, particularly if you go into the international environment, as Kathy spoke about, or you're in a major field office where everything happens all the time. There are no quiet times. I take nothing away from smaller offices. I loved my time in Milwaukee, which was a medium-sized office, but being in a Milwaukee or Oklahoma City or Omaha is just not being in New York. And it's not being in Washington, D.C. As you move up, things happen 24/7. There's no getting away from it. Although I was disappointed not to have had children, I think that it would have been almost impossible for me to have had the career that I had if it had happened the way I thought it would. It's always a balance. Was I disappointed I didn't have kids? Yeah. Do I have other people in my life and kids in my life that I didn't give birth to who matter to me? Yes. And one of those helped me change the way I looked at my own career 20 years in. I am grateful for that. And she just turned 18. I was there at her birth in 2004 in Paris. That totally changed the way I looked at my career. So there's no question that having a child in your life does that. And I'm grateful for that. But I think it would have been exceedingly difficult to have the career that I had and have the jobs that I had, especially in the latter 8 years or so of my career, with a child without a supportive partner.
And Jenna?
I agree with some of the things Lauren said about the type of jobs you choose to partake in can be affected by your home situation. I never had kids. I never got married. And I had more flexibility in the choices of assignments that I could take for the FBI because of that. And I knew that. But I think that if I had had children, if I had found a supportive partner, I might have made more sacrifices to my career in order to have that balance at home. Because my motto, and I had seen this in the very beginning when I transferred from Albany to Baltimore, where the FBI can't be your only life. You have to have balance. And so you either develop that with a family or you develop that with your friends and your social network outside of the FBI. I never wanted the FBI to be my whole focus, my whole identity, my whole life. I wanted it to be a balance. And so I tried to do that. But certainly not having kids gave me more flexibility. I got to travel the world with the FBI, did some crazy assignments, worked undercover cases because I was single and I could be gone for 6 months at a time. And so I enjoyed the flexibility that that choice gave me.
Anyone else? Kathy, go ahead.
I was going to say that I am married, but I've never wanted children. I've always known that I didn't want children. So I can't really say that if I had had children, would I have made different choices? I would like to think that if I had had children, that I would not have dragged them to the other side of the world only to drop them off and never see them for years, which is basically what I did to my husband. It was tough on our marriage. So I can't imagine that having children and putting children in that mix wouldn't be equally, if not more difficult. I don't think that I would have done what I did, gone off and worked in the LEGAT world if I'd had children, but who's to say? Hindsight is always 20/20.
Excellent. What are the benefits of the FBI increasing the number of female agents? And what advice would you give to women who are considering a career as an FBI agent? Why don't we just go down the list? So, Lauren?
What are the benefits to increasing the number of women agents? And I have a thing. I like to say women instead of female. But let's look at it this way. Our world is composed of more than 50% of women, regardless of where we are in the world. So why wouldn't we want more women, more people of color, more people of diverse gender, sexual preference, religion, ethnicity? We serve a diverse population. We should reflect that population. Women bring a different lived experience to our profession. That's just the way it is. And this is not exclusive, so I give that caveat. I think as a rule, we tend to be more empathetic. We are more compassionate. We are more likely, willing, and able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and consider other alternatives. Another big thing is that women, as a rule, come into law enforcement and rule of law institutions for different reasons than men. And again, it's not exclusive. Men are drawn to the authoritarian aspect of it. Women come in because they want to make their communities better. They want to help. They want to serve. At the beginning, there's a very different mental perspective about why you choose to get into this career. And I have found that to be the case, whether it's other women in the United States, whether it's women in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, it doesn't matter. Any of the places that I've worked and lived in, the commonality about why we as women choose these careers is generally different than why men choose it. And it's to make things better within a community. They think that's why we want and need more people in, because we need to reflect the community we serve. Another aspect that has historically set the United States and other Western nations apart is that rule of law institutions and democracy are created to protect and serve the people. When you look at those institutions in authoritarian countries or dictatorships, it's to keep the person in power. And there is inherently a very big difference between doing your job because you're trying to keep somebody in power versus doing your job to make your community safer. I could go on because I think you know, Jerry, that's a passionate area for me. So I will leave it at that. But I do see some very big differences. And again, they're not exclusive with what women bring to the equation and how we look at things differently. Just as women of color are going to look at things and have a different lived experience than I do as a white woman. There's just no question. I mean, I came from a family with no money. My parents were in poverty their lives. But my lived experience, Jerry, is still very different from yours, from Jenna's, from Masayo's. And I think that it's important to have the totality of all those different lived experiences to bring to what we do. I think it makes us more effective. I think it makes us more transparent. And I think that it makes us better as institutions and as organizations serving our population.
Beautiful. And Julia, our two questions are, what advice would you give to women who are thinking about coming into the FBI? And what are the benefits that women bring to the job?
There's no way I can say it any better than Lauren just said it. Perspective. We have a different perspective. Everybody has a different perspective. I know the Bureau is not perfect, but I believe in what the Bureau is supposed to stand for. Diversity is extremely important. We have to reflect the community. We have a different perspective, each of us. Whether we're women, whether we're people of color, what we have different religions, what our backgrounds, our socioeconomic backgrounds, we all bring a different perspective. sometimes those unique perspective, and where I'll kind of veer away from Lauren a little bit, is just give a couple of specific examples where my being a woman was helpful. It's kind of like what Katherine was saying, but I was picked to do interviews because the offenders didn't like men or didn't like law enforcement or had bad experiences. One offender had been coddled by his mother, so they wanted someone who was like a mother figure. So that's some unique characteristics that I have that the typical men in my office, and for a long period of time, for almost 7 years, I was the only female in the RA. So I'm the only one that can do some of these interviews. It shouldn't be like that. We should have a lot more women that can be handpicked to do that. But that's why you need to have women. If there was no women who are going to do some of these key interviews, that's kind of a specific example. I also think in terms of my work at the behavioral analysis unit, having women in the unit, there's so many women who are victimized. I would say the majority of the cases that I worked on, the victims were females and the survivors were females. So having that female perspective was really important for understanding victimology in a way a typical male agent can't understand. I think that's why it's so important. And there's just not enough. I mean, 20%, that's about what it was when I first joined the Bureau. It really hasn't grown much. So I don't know what's wrong, why we're not attracting more women into the FBI.
I do have some good news then to report. It's actually 22%, but the FBI has set a goal of 40%. And the last classes that have gone through Quantico have met that goal. 40% of the class going through Quantico in recent times have been women. And that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So Jenna, can you answer the question?
Again, as my esteemed, eloquent colleagues have already stated some very poignant facts, but I would also state, just as a general balance, we need balance in law enforcement. We need balance within the FBI. I think having women there only makes sense, just like we need to have representation from all the other ethnicities, sexual orientations, the genders, all of that needs to be represented because we are reflective of our population. And these are the people that we encounter as victims, and these are the people that we encounter as subjects in our cases. I also think that women tend to look at things in a more macro and micro view. As far as their investigations, they have in general, and again, not exclusively, have the ability to look at a case in a more holistic approach. And so I think we need that balance within our former agency. I think it brings a well-needed perspective to our cases. And as far as what advice I would give to women, I think we've talked about that before. But again, to persevere and to go into the job thinking that you can do it and learn all the things that you need to learn in order to do your job well.
Thank you. Masayo?
The FBI is special. The FBI is not like any other law enforcement agency. We're different. You have a lot of other agencies who strive to be like us. And I think one of the reasons why we are special is because we have women. Just like Lauren was saying, women, we bring compassion, we bring empathy, we bring sensitivity. Being an FBI agent or being an FBI is not always about who can shoot the straightest or who can make the SWAT team or who can arrest the bad guy. It's about understanding the human condition. It's about understanding that person that is in crisis at that time and being able to communicate with them and being able to connect with them. I think that as women, we have that ability to do that. Men do too, but in general, I think we have a better ability to do that. Our job is about getting information from people who don't want to give it to us. And it's not always about coming in and saying, I'm FBI and this is how it's going to be. That's not how you get information from people. It's about connecting with them and understanding where they are and being in that place with them at that time. And I think women bring that to the table. As for advice, I already kind of touched on that, but one thing I did want to add, most people in this world are good people. They're trying to pay their bills, put food on the table, take care of their people. But when you're working cases and you're engulfed and surrounded by that small population of people that want to hurt innocent people, it's our job to protect those innocent people or to recover them or to help them out of that position. I felt like when I was working cases, I got swallowed into that. I got swallowed up by it and I lost faith in mankind because I was surrounded by so much evil. Working white collar, working human trafficking, you see what people are capable of and how they're willing to treat innocent people. And I got to the point where I was like, what is wrong with us? I needed to remember that this is a small percentage of the population. People are not bad by nature. It's just the people that we're investigating, that we're surrounded by, that are. I think it's really important to surround yourself with that good support system, friends, family. I played tennis. That was my thing. So I'd hit a ball. Keep in mind that just because you see the evil in people working cases, it does not represent what the majority of the people are.
That's great advice. And Jane?
As always, everyone has already said it best. What I wanted to just expand upon was the whole compassion aspect of things. I think that women approaching a subject or a target or a situation are less threatening than a male. When I was at the FBI, we would evaluate every situation. Are we arresting a female subject or male subject? Do we need a female for this interview, that interview? And it was always sort of a subject that was there, but not of paramount importance. If we only had 2 females to go out for an interview one day, 2 females went out for the interview that day. But it's just so interesting to me now. I've been retired since 2014, and across the board, attorneys, clients who are non-attorneys, every single client wants a female retired FBI agent because they're less threatening, more approachable, and easier to get along with than male agents. I just think it's just a fascinating aspect of what we can bring to investigations and life in general.
Thanks, Jane. And Kathy?
I agree with what everyone else has said, so I won't repeat anything there. But one of the things that I would like to point out is that when male agents retire from the FBI, most of them go and they get a job that's very similar to their job in the FBI, something that has to do with the badge and the gun. Whereas when women retire from the FBI, I know so many women who do something completely different. Like they become podcasters or they become writers or they become professors. And so that tells me that women go into the FBI for a different reason, not for the authority, not so that, I could carry a gun and a badge now and I can tell people what to do. I think that's really, really important for us to take a look at, is that the job really is not about the gun. We bring so much to the job that I think that we even forget what we bring to the job. So I just want to say kudos to every single one of you. I think you all are amazing, amazing women. And I'm sitting here tonight and I'm listening to all your stories. Thank you for everything that you've done and for all the women who are going to come after us, because they are going to stand on our shoulders.
And Judy?
I would echo what everybody else says, but I can't help but think if a woman had taken that Larry Nassar complaint, there wouldn't be a lawsuit in the Bureau today.
I had to let the listeners know that every one of us are cheering and clapping and agreeing with you.
I think women can be great interviewers and learn how to listen and be empathetic. I don't think a woman in that initial interview would have said, "Is that all there is?" I think they would have wanted to interview every member of the team. I just think you need more women in the Bureau. And if I could give any advice to someone who's looking for the job, hone your skills as a listener and an interviewer. That's really the bread and butter of the job. That is how the job is done, with your ability to interview and listen to people and write, being able to write well too. That's my advice.
I had to make sure I answered this question. I've always thought that the type of woman who joined the FBI is different in most cases than the type of man. I know that most of the women are liberal. I mean, look, there are women who've decided to go into a job that has traditionally been known as a male job. That's a liberal attitude right there. And of course, the men are more conservative, a lot of them coming from the military or from law enforcement. We're different almost from the very beginning. And you can see that sometimes in those clashes. I think a lot of times when we feel that we are being treated unfairly or with a bias, a lot of times it's because the men are afraid. I mean, they see us coming in and doing such a fantastic job. I will also say that I've never felt that the fact that I am a maternal person, I mean, I love kids and I'm kind to kids, was a detriment to my career. As a matter of fact, I think it was just the opposite, because a lot of times I could be talking to a man and that's how I was able to get them to confess and to talk with me, was giving them that empathy and understanding where they were coming from. And I definitely think that that is a big asset for the Bureau to have women who aren't afraid of being vulnerable with their subjects and their victims. And then as far as advice, I always like to say for women coming in to be confident, my definition of being confident is knowing that you'll be able to figure it out. Not that you have all the answers, not that you're going to walk into a situation and know exactly what to do, but be confident in the fact that you're going to be able to figure it out. I want to thank everyone that was here today. Lauren Anderson, Julia Cowley, Gina Davis, Masayo Halpin, Jane Mason, Katherine Schweit, Kathy Stearman, Judy Tyler. Thank you so much for being here. And that's the end of the panel discussion. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode to the show notes where you'll find photos of my guest, a short bio for each of them, and a link to their original FBI Retired Case File Review episode. To commemorate this 50th anniversary of Women Agents, the official FBI website, fbi.gov, is sharing stories of active female agents assigned to field offices all over the United States and FBI headquarters. There's a link in the show notes so that you can hear from these amazing women too. For next week's episode commemorating the 50th anniversary of Women Agents, we honor Special Agent Martha Dixon, a service martyr who made the ultimate sacrifice and was killed in the line of duty. I speak with her family members and former FBI coworkers who share loving memories about Martha. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.